showing that you achieve your objective at the end of the day. So we usually write your results using a simple pattern. You give a descriptive narration of what your variables are. That's when you talk about the mean, the median, the mode, the frequency of occurrence of your variable of interest. So that is what comes first in your results. Then if your study objective aim to do that, then you start talking about how the variables interact. Your exposure variable, how it interacts with your outcome variable, or put it in a better way, your dependent and independent variable, how the two of them relate together. Then again, if your objective has inferential statistics to it, if you want to make a causative conclusion, then you should present the regression analysis or inferential statistics of your finding. The key thing about results is that it focuses on the first point, that's objective. Your results should relate to the objective. I can't overemphasize because we've seen it over and over. People bring in results that were not either to mention in the objective and give it a prominent role in their manuscript, or objectives that were set out ab initio. You will look through the result and you will not see any results speaking to that objective. That should not be the case. You should have your results speaking to your objective. So your results section is usually the shortest part of your manuscript because it's usually a concise reporting of exactly what you found. Your results should not be a section where you start giving your own inference. You should not have discussion like in your results saying like, however, the proportion found in this study is less than 10% compared to this. That should not be a result. There should be nothing that infers you are making an inference from the result. You are just presenting the result as found, and that's exactly what you're expected to do in results section. I've mentioned this, that each paragraph should speak to a specific outcome. Other findings of interest in your study should not distract you. You can mention it as supplementary finding at the end of your write-up, but it should not be the main, or presenting incidental finding as the main findings of your study. You should only report results that speak to your objective. Then another thing I've seen commonly is that, especially in some local manuscript, that you see some work having about 6, 7, 8 tables. 5 tables is more than enough, and it will speak to what tables are essentially meant to do in the manuscript. By the time you understand what it's supposed to do, then you will know that you don't actually need more than 5 tables in a manuscript. You can actually do with less. Then there are appropriate ways of labeling your table. And just as a rule of thumb, how do you know if your table is well drawn, is well put in your manuscript? A table that is well done is one in which, when you cover the prose in your work and you just read the table and the legend alone, you can exactly understand what the message the table is passing across. That's a table well drawn. But if you have a table that you need to refer back to the text to understand what is on it, then that table is not well done. So as a litmus test for a table, just cover up the prose of the manuscript, read the table alone, and decide if you can understand what the table speaks to. Then that is a good table. We all know that picture speaks louder than words, if I'm quoting it rightly. What you say with 1,000 words, you can do with one picture, and the picture will capture exactly what exactly you want to pass across. So we use figures in driving home a point we want the reader to understand. And there are different types of figures. So we encourage, one of my mentors from Linda, she told me that I should never publish a manuscript without having a figure, a picture, something to bring out the highlights of my manuscript, so that if the person doesn't have time to read the whole manuscript, looking at the picture is able to see the key findings from my results. So I encourage us that we should make use of figure because they are powerful and important. So let's look at how do we choose the visual aids. Visual aids are, like I mentioned, aids to summarize and emphasize key points and reduce narrative, reduce length. You know, as scientists, we are we have little time. We move. Our attention span is quite low because we have a lot to cover. So scientists move from one paper to the other. So if you have a prose that is so long, it's very difficult for a scientist or a researcher to just stay put with your manuscript and read it all through. So therefore, you should give your manuscript in a concise manner and very clearly so that you only use narrative where it is essential. And when we talk about visual aids, the most commonly used, like I mentioned, is the table. There are other visual aids as we would describe in specific. So let me just use this table to give a summary of what and when to use which visual aid. I'm sure many of us may not be familiar with listing. So let me start with it. Listing is a form of visual aid that you can do. So you can list out a discrete variable that you think is occurring maybe in order, or you can list it out in terms of if it has a pattern, you can list it out so that when the readers see the list, they can easily understand the pattern that occur within the list. Then tables are the only visual aids that allow you to present raw data. So if 10 persons, if 48% or 47 persons out of about 100 persons that are supposed to attend this training session are present at this moment, if I want to show the proportion, the ratio of people that attended, the only visual aid that allows me to put the number directly. Some other graphs can allow you add numbers to it, but the ones that if you put figures addressing multiple variables at a single time is a table. So when you think the raw data or the proportions or the values that comes out of your result is so important that you want the reader to have a grasp of what the figures are, then tables are the appropriate means of showing that. And one aspect where you have it so important is social demographics, which is usually table one for many observational study. For randomized control trial, your table one is usually a table comparing your two variables to see whether they are balanced, to determine whether there is balance of your randomization works well. So that's what table one does for you in randomized control trial. And tables have become so important that especially for randomized control trial, what table one stands for is already known. What table two stands for is already known. So that for any work you're doing, if you're doing a randomized control trial, we know what we expect to see in table one, we know what we expect to see in table two. And because of that, some concepts are actually developed from the fact that table one is known for something. So that's why we have concepts like table one fallacy that speaks to let me not digress, but that's why I have table one fallacy, table two fallacies that speaks to particular concept, knowing that when you're doing a randomized control trial, we know that exactly what is your table one and table two is expected to be. And also for observational study, we know that table one is usually your social demographics. Then table two can speak to your objectives as you've highlighted. Some will say that you should have a table or a chart speaking to each of your objectives. It is not a must, but if you think it's important to drive home your point, then you can actually highlight it. I'll still come to table in particular, but let me mention at this point, it is not a good practice to have a table in which you have all your entry at zero, no entry, no counts within that variable. If that is the case, you rather remove that one and discuss it in your prose. So let me talk about line diagram. Line diagram are a form of chart that helps you discuss pattern, how things have changed over a period of time, and we're going to be looking at it. The bar graph is used for categorical variable. As the name implies, it gives a bar to each of your category, and the size of the bar relates exactly to how the distribution of the frequency of occurrence of those discrete variable is. Also, each bar has a meaning of what it stands for. Then, like I mentioned earlier, diagrams, pictures are very easy to show relationship between two variables. So if you want to show how receptors and ligands relate to each other, a diagram will probably be the best way to relate. I'm sure we've seen a couple of it when we are reading, where they will show how the interleukins and all those intracellular effect takes place. So it's diagram that can help you describe that. No matter the way you've described it in prose, you won't be able to communicate it the way the diagram will help you to do. If you want to show process, a flowchart will help you, and we'll go on and discuss this in one after the other. So in drawing a table, how do you draw a table? What is the appropriate way of drawing a table? The most appropriate way of drawing table is the way the journal you are going to present, you are going to submit a paper to, have asked you to do it. But if the journal you are submitting to do not have instruction on how they want that table to be, then there is a rule of thumb that is expected of you. And that rule of thumb is that you have a table that has 3 horizontal lines and no vertical line. I'm showing you in the next slide how that is expected to be. When you do it that way, it allows you to present your finding in a clear manner so that people do not have difficulty in reading what your table is presenting. I already mentioned that your table should be designed so that it can be a standalone. And when you use abbreviation, do not expect readers to go into your prose to understand the abbreviation that is in your table. So you should put the abbreviation there. Then avoid overuse of abbreviation and avoid using abbreviations that are not standard, and avoid substituting standard abbreviations for other things. So you see people write C for chi-square when we all know that the symbol of chi-square is well defined. So when you put C as chi-square, it's difficult for readers to understand what exactly you are passing. So use standard abbreviation when necessary and avoid excessive abbreviations. Now, this is what I'm describing about 3 horizontal lines. So you can see that this is the first line, this is the second line I'm referring to, and this is the third line. Sometimes you can have this fourth line just to delineate the description. So this can actually come as the description of the table above. Sorry. This can actually come above the table rather than be within this point, and it will describe it. But if you have to do it, then you can do it this way. So it's going to be, this is a major line, this is second major line, this is third major line. You may or may not have this. But what you sometimes see is that you see lines this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So by the time you are looking at it, it becomes so monotonous, so difficult to really delineate very clearly, because you see many lines crisscrossing and distracts the reader. But looking at it this way is very clear. So this is a table well drawn. Now, sometimes you have difficulty in determining what should be on this axis and what should be on this axis. And I'm going to give you how you should know. So usually we expect that your exposure, or what we call your independent variable, should be on this axis, while your outcome should be listed here. This is the ideal. But when you have a situation, you have many outcomes, that is really encountered in many of our research work. Usually you have few outcomes, present or absent, A or B, placebo or intervention. So there are usually 2, and that will appear here. But when you have multiple outcomes, then you may turn your table to have your outcome here and your exposure here. But the rule of thumb is that exposure is always on this axis, while your outcome is on this axis. So this table has been redrawn here, and you can see that it's better presented than what you have in the upper table. So that's that about table. So when you put your legend for your table, you must describe, I mentioned this, that you must describe it in a specific way so that when it's covered, you can really, when your prose is covered, you can understand what exactly the table is speaking to. And this is showing you an example of a vague and a clearly defined table legend. Now, when you are putting legend to table, also as a rule of thumb, tables takes their legend on top of it. Five figures have it below. So if you have a chart or any figure, you put your legend below, but for tables, usually above. Then your tables should have similar titles and headings. You shouldn't be using different terms at different, be consistent so that readers can easily follow what you're speaking to. I can see a hand up. I don't know if it's a legacy hand or it's something that needs to be attended to immediately.
Yes, please. Could you just clarify? You were saying the axis where the exposure and outcome should be. You were just saying on this axis. Could you use
Okay,
X
so
and
okay,
Y
let me
because
use
some
the
of us
right
are
word.
not
So
seeing it?
thank you. So let me just use exact word. So your column is your column is your outcome variable, shows the direction of your outcome variable, while the row shows your exposure variable. I hope that is clear. My laptop has ceased. Okay, yeah. So the column is expected to show the outcome variable or the dependent variable, while the row is expected to show your exposure or the independent variable. Thank you for that. Or some will say vertical axis and horizontal axis. So the horizontal is the exposure, while the vertical axis is the outcome. Thanks for that timely question. So as regards line diagram, the line diagram or line graph helps you to show how things have changed over a period of time. And it's something you're going to see commonly. Usually it helps to show. So for example, the line diagram shown on the screen now is showing the direction, how the sales has changed over a period of time from January to December. So when you look at the line diagram, it helps to tell the story of what has happened over a period of time. And you can only use line diagram for an outcome that is continuous. You can't use a line diagram for a categorical variable. So you can see how it has changed over the period of time. Again, in terms of drawing graphs, usually your y-axis is your outcome, while your x-axis is your exposure. So with this, you can see how things have changed, and you can make comparison between two or three groups, three countries, or depending on whatever variables you are looking at. But when you are drawing a line diagram, be careful how you draw it. Do not put too many variables on a single line diagram, otherwise it becomes so difficult to delineate. Just imagine reading this line diagram that is on this. It's difficult to really delineate how things have changed using this. So rather than use a single line diagram to compare multiple variables, you can divide your variables into different groups and make comparison as appropriate. Also, just to mention this, some actually frown at using grid line in graphs generally. So some believe that grid lines should not be seen on a graph, while others do not mind. So again, it also depends on what the journal you are presenting also make a request for. So I already mentioned about bar graphs, what bar graph speaks to. So these are different bar graphs. It can be horizontal or vertical. And there are three major types of bar graph. There is the composite that puts like you have here 1, 2, 3, putting them together, or it can be stocked in which you put each of these items, each of your variables are put over each other to show you how the variables relate to each other in terms of proportion. Then it can be simple bar graph in which you are only presenting a single component in which there are no multiple factors being presented in the bar graph. So with this, you can see this is a composite bar graph, and it has within it the figures. So remember I mentioned that table is the one that really helps you to show figure. But sometimes to benefit from figure and table, some graphs can allow you to present figures along with your graphs. Sometimes if you are doing an histograph, which we will come to, you can actually also present the confidence interval along with your figures. So let's talk about pie charts. Pie charts is derived from the word pie, and we all know what pies are. So if you have a whole, if you have something that's an entity, and you want to describe what proportions a certain group takes within the whole, then pie chart is what you use. That infers that you can only use a pie chart when you have the whole present. If you don't have the whole, if you don't have a number to what the whole variable you are going to discuss is all about, then you cannot use a pie chart. You can only use other description, maybe a background. But when you have the whole, I want to show, you want to highlight how certain group relates to others, the pie chart can give you a picture of it within a snapshot, and that's what pie chart is used to. So remember that when you are doing a pie chart, you should be able to decide what fraction each of the component of the pie takes within the whole distribution. If you cannot describe what proportion it takes, then you are not expected to use pie charts. And there are different designs of pie chart, but some school of thought will tell you that avoid using pie chart that has so much design that is 3D designs. They prefer you use the simple pie charts that communicate, except you think doing these designs like you see will help you communicate your message clearly. Otherwise, when it's time you are doing 3D, it may hide some information about some certain group. For example, this 3D picture you're seeing has brought this to the fore. What color? This orange color to the fore, and taking this blue to the rear, so that if I'm looking at this pie chart, this may be all that will catch my attention. So, but if it's a simple pie chart that is 2D, you're going to see everything at a given at a snapshot, and it won't distort the message you want to pass across. But if the intention is probably to pass across this message, the red section which is cut in this picture, you want to highlight it, then the 3D may be appropriate in passing the message. So using graphs and figures in writing manuscript is both science and art. You look at it and you determine what message you want to pass in taking a decision on which charts you want to use. I already mentioned how important pictures are, and I don't think I need to emphasize it. A lot of time you are going to see what we call data visualization, where you use graphs and pictures or maps to highlight the message you want to pass across. So this, when you see the map of the world, you can easily pass a message about how the variable you are discussing relates globally. And without reading your prose, people were able to understand what message has been passed. The scatter graph is a graph that relates two continuous variables to each other. So you may want to say that it looks like a line diagram. A line diagram relates an outcome variable which is usually continuous to time, to a period of time. But in terms of scatter diagram, it relates two continuous variables showing how they relate to each other, height and weight, income and hours of work. So it shows you how each of them correlates with each other. So the direction, usually when you do a scatter diagram, using some statistical analysis, you can draw a line of best fit. And that line of best fit can tell you how the variables relate to each other. So for example, in this graph you're seeing, there's a strong positive correlation. You can see almost all the points are lying on a straight line that is abutting on the abutting directly on the O point on the graph, while a strong negative correlation is the inverse of the strong positive. But you can see on the strong positive, they all line also on the line of best fit. But the more they scatter away from the line of best fit, the weaker they are in terms of correlation. And there are ways of measuring this degree of correlation, which is called the R. And depending on which statistics you are doing, your statistician will tell you whether you can do Spearman correlation or Pearson correlation or Kendall correlation. Those are what your statistician will help you determine. But if you want to show the reader how your variables relate, especially continuous variable, a line diagram, a scatter diagram will help you do it. And usually, if you are doing regression analysis, linear regression, this graph is usually drawn. Whether I present it or not to the reader is a different thing. But usually, when you're doing an inferential statistics, doing linear regression, you usually have this done by your statistical package. So just to mention histogram. Histogram is used just like you use bar graph to describe historical variable. The histogram helps you to describe continuous variable. And you can, with your histogram, you can show the distribution of your data and know whether it's actually normally distributed or not. You can draw a frequency polygon over your chart, which also shows you the normality of your variable. These are just few of the visual aids you can do. You have stem and leaf, which is a different type of chart. There are several other charts, but these are key charts that we often use in manuscript writing. But depending on the data you have, you can use some more advanced form of figures in your table or in your work. So like I mentioned, most journals will have their specific request. So again, just to mention at this point, if you are going to make a manuscript, write a manuscript, we always advise that you identify 2 or 3 journals where you intend to publish your work. So that by the time you are writing, you start writing to fit into what the journal require of you, so that you don't write and at the end of the day, it is not acceptable to the journal. So also it's important you present your data to enable people doing systematic review, be able to reuse your data. And systematic review is one of the reasons why many work are cited. If you want your work to be cited, you need to present your data in such a way that it can be used for systematic review. Your raw data is important for systematic review because they will pull data together. So when you over summarize your table, then the people doing systematic review may not be able to use your data. They may not have to make a request for you to provide raw data, and sometimes there will be loss of communications. Your paper will not be cited when you have opportunity to be cited. Another reason is that why your data should be, if you follow a formal standard, is that evidences, the whole essence of writing, the whole essence of doing manuscript writing is that you want to provide knowledge, you want to provide evidence that will guide practice. So if you present your data in such a way that people do systematic review, which we know is the basis for evidence generation, cannot use your data, it means your work will not be contributing to practice, which I'm sure you would not want, you not like. Also, when drawing your figures, when deciding what your figures should look like, be careful with colors. Put in mind people who are color blinded when you are designing your graphs and all of that. Choose a color that is neutral for all type of eyesight. Remember that when you use colored printout to submit for your journal, some journals actually are going to ask you to make payment because you are publishing in color. You may need to make extra payment. So these are things we should consider. I think we need to move a little faster. I think I've spoken to this. Your illustration, its label should tell a story about your manuscript independent of the narrative. Your manuscripts should be incomplete without having those figures you are putting there. So if you have a manuscript and the manuscript can do without having those tables, then I can as well remove that table. So again, I need to mention at this point that when you have a table, you should not go to your pros and discuss exactly everything on your table. Your pros should just pick those key points that in your table that you think you need to summarize and want the reader to focus on. So, for example, you have all this kind of all form of social demographics on your table one, but you think the range of age is important for your reader to take attention to pay attention to, then you can write the pros on it. But you don't need to write the pros on parity, age, level of education, write pros on each of the variables in your social demographic. You just pick the most important one to highlight in your table, to highlight in your pros. So I think we can move to discussion, which is going to be a very short discussion. A very short, that's a point. A very short section. So when you write a manuscript, the area that shows your intellect in terms of the work you are doing is your discussion. But that is the only point where your words, your thoughts come into your write-up. For the other aspect we've discussed, if you remember very well, all the other aspects have content that do not emanate from you. There are things that emanate from others. So your introduction emanates from previous works that has been done or evidences that you generated from a literature review. Your method is essentially discussing what you're going to do. It's not your thoughts. Your results present the figures that arise from your study without you putting your thoughts. But in your discussion section is where your own thoughts about your finding comes in. I tell people when I discuss discussion that imagine discussion to seem like you've done a research work, you have your result. Now you are sitting in a round table, in the center of a round table, with experts in your field sitting around you, with you at the center. You have your result with you. You are presenting results and discussing the finding to them, telling them, okay, this is my own finding compared to what you found. It's similar. And the reason why the similarity is because we probably study the same population. So for you, my result is different from your own. And the reason why it's different is this. I can also infer, oh, possibly this is the reason why we have a difference between these two groups and my own. So this is where your own knowledge comes into place, and that's where you're going to be quoted. That's where people quote you from. So the quotation, the citation you're going to have is usually going to generate from your discussion. So what should your discussion have? Usually your first paragraph summarizes the key findings. Remember, they have an objective at the start of your study. So you summarize the answers to your objective, your first paragraph. Oh, we found that 48% of APIN staff attend the manuscript writing classes every Friday morning. 50% of them are male, while the other 50% of them. Okay, another point to mention here, as it just came to my mind, that when you are reporting your finding for variables that are binary, you do not need to mention male or female, yes or no. If I mention that 50% are male, invariably, I mean, I'm making an assumption that gender, sex is 2. So invariably, 50% are female. I don't need to say 50% are male, 50% are female. Or if it's 40% attend, 40%, if 60% did not attend, then if I've mentioned that 40% attend, allow the readers to make an inference that 60% do not attend, except it's not a binary, then you need to state what the disproportions are. So usually it's not expected that you mention the binary variable, describe all the binary variable in details when you're writing your results. Then the next thing after you summarize your finding is to discuss the strength of your study, then the limitation of your study. Then you now give meaning, just like I was explaining earlier, to your findings. Results, again, like I tell my students, is that results is you discussing your finding. Results is you explaining your findings to others. So you pick your findings and give an interpretation to what it means in the background of already known knowledge, or in the background of the context in which you are doing your research. So you give meaning to your research, and how it relates to what others have done. If it meets what you expected, if your result is inconclusive, there are surprising findings, then you discuss. Then your results, your discussions also speak to what further research should be done based on what you find. Then you give a conclusion. Now, I'm sure this order that I've described may sound unusual for some of us on this call, describing strength and limitation before discussing the context of your finding. Many a times you will see summary of finding, discussion of your findings, the limitation will be the last thing, then conclusion. If you look at the equator guideline for any of the study design, you realize that the way it is described is what we've put on this slide. And the thinking behind this is that when people read your finding, when they read your discussion, it's important they put the limitation and the strength of the study behind their mind before they start reading the findings. Otherwise, they will read the findings before they now start relating the limitation back to what they've read. So if I already told you that, oh, I was only able to carry out this research amongst 10 participants out of the 100 participants that are planned because of dropping loss to follow up. Whatever findings I'm discussing later in subsequently, the reader is able to relate my finding to that limitation I've discussed earlier. Or if I say that, oh, this one of the strengths of my study is that it's a randomized control trial. So every other discussion I'm putting in this manuscript as regards my finding, the reader is able to relate to the fact that, oh, even though somebody has found something different, RCT, which is what I'm reading now, is finding this. This is a higher level of evidence compared to what those other studies has gotten. So that is why it is better to do it in this order. And when you look at the guidelines, the Equator guidelines, the Consult guideline, the Stroke guideline, Cherry's guideline, and all the guidelines that you have, you see that it follows this pattern of reporting research finding. So we are rounding up. What should your discussion not? What should you not include in your discussion? You should not bring in new result to your discussion. Something that is not presented in your result, now starting to present it in discussion. And again, you should not repeat your results section because people do not understand what discussion is all about. What you often see is that people carry their results and dump in discussion session, and you cannot really delineate what the difference between result and discussion is. Most time, what some people do is just rephrase the finding of their results and put it in the discussion session. That should not be. Like to explain what discussion should be, and it differs from what result is. Your discussion should not be out of scope of your study objective, and do not make sweeping statements. We know as researchers, as scientists, we we frown at making sweeping statements, making speculative statements, making statements that cannot be backed with evidence that you generate from your study. So if you're going to be making inference, you should not make inference that is so far away from the result you are presenting. So I should not do a pilot study of 10 persons and say that my finding infer that this is the best method of doing this certain procedure. So your inferences should relate well to your findings. Then you should your conclusion should relate to the data that you've accrued. All right. So what should your conclusion be? Your conclusion should be a summary of your key findings, the take-home message. What should the reader take home from from the work you've done? What should the reader expect in future? How does your finding relate to the existing knowledge? How does your study fill the gap in knowledge? Those are what your conclusion should speak to. Of course, we've mentioned that you should not raise a new argument in your conclusion, or you should not have an objective that has a major result and is not reflecting in your conclusion. Another way I tell people to do conclusion is go and read your study objective, then read your conclusion. Is it answering the study objective or your research question? So if I say my objective is to determine the proportion of APIN staff that attend this webinar, my conclusion will be that, 45% of APIN staff attend the webinar every Friday. So your conclusion should answer the question your objectives tend to ask. And it's usually in a summarized version. So you don't list it out, but you summarize in such a way that it's in a way that somebody that reads your conclusion and go on with it, like a take-home package you are giving your reader to go on with. All right. So in conclusion, your discussion, like I mentioned, is a storytelling. You're telling a story, answering a question, and it should be such a way that you answer your question clearly. Your discussion should give a direction to readers how the future of your study should be. Thank you very much for your time. I hope we have enough time to take questions. Thank you. Toby, are you on the call, Faida?
Yes, I am.
Oh, please let me coordinate the question.
All right, sir. So if you have any question, you can use the raise your hand or drop it on the chat box, and your questions will be answered.
All right. If you have questions, comments, or people sharing their experience of, I'm sure many of us have written manuscript before. What challenges you had in writing any of these sessions or any of your own experience? Okay, I think we may have to give ourselves back 40 minutes of our time.
Someone is raising his
Oh,
hand.
great. Okay,
So you
that's
can
lovely.
ask your question.
All right. Much for the great presentation. Just a small highlight I may want to get in your
Yeah.
discussion. I guess I'm being heard.
Yes, loud.
Oh, okay. So in a discussion, since you, the author, takes the center table in the discussion, while you are also reaching out to other publications or other people's opinion, how elaborate or how detailed or how dependent would you, how much will you bring in other people's view into that your discussion? I'm like trying to look at how much of a references are expected to come into your discussion. Does that having lots of other references, does it make the work richer, or does it make your discussion better, or allowing your opinion based on your findings to dominate? Does it make the work better?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very great question. So what you are doing in discussion, it has to be done in moderation. So you have your finding and you want to discuss your finding, you want to show the importance or the context in which your finding should be interpreted. So for example, let me go back to the APIN example. So I probably would say 49% of so if in my results, so let me use this example to portray the message I've been trying to pass across. So in the results session, the figure I got from my statistics is 49%. So I'm going to say 49% of APIN staff attend the Friday morning session. That will be my result. So when I get to discussion session, I'm going to present it this way. Half of the APIN staff attend APIN session, which is similar to what other NGO staff, non-governmental organization staff do in similar training, as discussed by, sorry, I'm trying to say your name. Okay, as described by Dr. Issa in 2026, the pattern has remained the same. This probably is related to the time available for them to attend such early morning program. So the time available for them to attend early morning program is the inference I am making to explain these findings. I've brought in the work Dr. Issa did to corroborate what I found. It can be the reverse. So half of them attended in this study. My finding is half of them attended, which is at variance to findings by Adijat and Ambrose in Calabar, where most APIN staff attend, where majority of APIN staff attend such training. This finding may be related to the difference in the community where these NGOs reside, or this finding may be related to the difference in work schedule in the different community. I don't know if I passed the message. So I don't need to bring so many references to make that point, but I will bring in the most important reference that help me make my points, to help me drive home my message, to help me show the context in which my findings should be read. I don't know if that passes the message clearly. Sorry, I'm trying to see who asked the question. If the person is still on the call, please confirm. Okay. Okay,
yes,
Chukwu, am I right?
fine. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
I got it.
Okay, yeah, Samsung SM just asked a question. Please, what happens if your finding deviates from every other study? Fine, great. So your result finding should not be exactly like every other finding. That is, if your result is going to be exactly like what others have found, then there is no reason to do your study. There is a reason why you decide to do your work in the first place. The reason why you decide to do your work is either to see whether it's going to be different from what others have found, or it's going to be similar. So if it's different, if it's different from what every others have found, then it's now your own responsibility to make an explanation on why you think this difference exists. Or this your thoughts should not be tangential, should not be something coming from nowhere. It should be based on the understanding of your field. If you bring in a sweeping statement, a statement that does not show, that somebody reading you will find difficult to accept. So, for example, I say the reason why majority of APIN staff did not attend the morning lectures because they are as rich as Dangote, so they don't feel the need for it. So that would be offline. That would be off point. That is not a good inference to make from the finding. I'm going to make an inference that is logical and plausible based on the findings I have. I don't know if that message answers the question. Perfect. Nneka, you asked a very important question. I'm happy with the quality of questions being asked. So it's not whether there are instances. There are many instances, especially when you're doing a novel work, in which you don't find an exact comparator to the findings you had. And sometimes it becomes difficult to see how do you discuss, given that there are no previous work to be done. The truth is that there's no work you do that does not have something that relates, maybe not exactly, but there is a relationship to it. Maybe you're doing a work on, can't come up with a readily available example now. There's something that will not be so far from it. You can derive inference from that is far from it. But if there is absolutely nothing to compare, then you discuss your finding and give inference to why your finding is like that without necessarily making comparison. But the truth is, when you search well, sometimes when we say there are no work to make comparison to, my mentors have told me that it's because you've not done a good literature review. There is almost no work that does not exist. Yes, when you do a novel work, you may not have exact comparator. So I'm studying APIN staff. I may not have an exact work that are studying people that are working HIV NGO research mentoring, but probably have people that work in other groups that do research mentoring. I can make comparison between them, highlighting how they relate and how they differ. I hope that answers the question. Let me stop sharing so I can see.
There is one more question.
Okay.
He said, thank you, Dr. Kudus. Are there instances where you have limited studies that you
Okay.
can refer
That's
to,
the
and what
question
do
I just
you...
answered.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Any other one? I like when people ask questions, it means they follow. Or comments. Let's use our 6 minutes. Comment on people that have probably written before, have issues with results or discussion. Let's enrich the conversation. Or if there are none, probably give back our 5 minutes to use for to start our weekends early. All right. Okay, I think we have to call it a day. Rosemary is on a trip currently, actually traveled, and she's on her way back. She's not able to join the call, but she sends her regards. Thank you very much. I hope I'm able to present it well enough for you guys to pick the message. All right. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.